After weeks of looking for your dream home, you finally go under contract, you go through the inspection period, you order your appraisal, and it's $10,000 too low? What do you do? In this video, we're going to go over appraisals and what you can do if they come in a little too low. I've got tips for buyers and sellers in this video, so stay tuned. In this video, we're going to go over what an appraisal is and what you should do if your appraisal comes in a little too low. My name is Maegann Yarbrough. I'm your AZ real estate geek. I'm a realtor with eXp Realty and I serve the Phoenix, Arizona area. If you're new to my channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that little like button and the bell. It really helps share these videos to other people who might need a little more help with their real estate questions. So let's start off with, what is the appraisal? You're going to hear so many terms during your real estate journey between appraisal, inspection, contingency, concessions. It just gets a little overwhelming, but let's focus just on the appraisal. You will have an appraisal if you are financing your home. So if you're using a conventional loan or a government loan like an FHA loan or a VA loan or a USDA loan, all of those are going to require an appraisal. The appraisal is ordered by the lender so that they have record of how much the home is actually worth, because your lender will not lend for more than the home is worth. So they want to make sure that the value is correct in what you offered in your home. This is a really big deal right now. We're in a seller's market, which means the prices are going up, which means people are overbidding what the list price is. And that appraisal is what's kind of reining those prices back in, because lenders will not lend on a property that is priced $50,000 more than it's worth. So you found a fantastic home, you put an offer in, and your seller accepted on the home. Usually, at least in the state of Arizona, you go into an inspection period where you're checking out the home, you're looking and seeing if it needs repairs, if the neighborhood is the way you like it. And normally I'll tell my clients, do your inspection, and when you feel satisfied like you are going to move forward with the home, you need to order your appraisal. So you'll order your appraisal through your lender. The appraisal is usually something that you'll pay up front. It normally ranges about $500. Either they'll have you pay for it right away, or it's taken out as part of your closing costs at the end of your transaction. Every lender's a little different on how they do that. So ask your lender how the appraisal is handled in your transaction. Once the appraisal is ordered, then they assign it to a third-party appraiser. And again, it's going to depend on what kind of loan you're using. If you're using a conventional loan versus a government loan, they have specific appraisers that appraise those homes. The appraiser does get a copy of the contract, so they do know what the purchase price is, but they are going to do so much work to find out what the actual value of the home is. They're going to check comparable properties, usually properties that are the same square footage, the same model, in the same neighborhood, the same age. They're going to measure the square footage. They're also going to look for any kind of upgrades that your home has versus other homes in the area. Does it have a pool? Does it have brand new countertops and cabinets? They're going to look at tax records, and they're going to look at sold properties that have been sold in the area recently, to get a better idea of what the value of the home is. And if there's a government appraisal like an FHA or a VA, they're also going to look and see if there are things that are broken that would impede the house's habitability. So if the air conditioning is not working, or if there's exposed wires, or if the hot water's not working, those will be conditions of the appraisal. So even if it hits the right dollar amount, those things would need to be repaired to be able to close on the house. It's a way to protect you as a buyer. Once the appraisal is completed, it's usually sent to you, the buyer, and the lender. Usually us real estate agents, we're usually the last to know sometimes. So I always tell my clients like, once you get that appraisal, let me know so I can work on that. And as a buyer who paid for the appraisal, that appraisal belongs to you. It is your property. So you can share that with others or choose not to. And we'll talk a little bit about why it should be a good idea maybe to share that with the seller. But let's talk about what happens when you receive the appraisal. First, the appraisal may come in at the purchase price. So if you put a contract in for a home and the purchase price is $300,000 and the appraisal comes in at $300,000, then everybody wins. The buyer is getting a home that is worth what they're paying for it. The seller is selling the home for the price that they want, and everybody's happy. So the lender can lend on that loan and we move on. Second, the appraisal could come in above your purchase price. So it could come in at $320,000. In that situation, I usually just tell the seller, we appraised, and the buyer gets a big smile on their face because they already have some instant equity in their home. So that's usually a good thing, because in that case, you're essentially paying less for the house than it's worth. So that's a great thing for the buyer. The third thing that could happen is the appraisal comes in low. And that is not fun for anybody. So that's what you're here for this video, right? Like, what do you do when it comes in low? You actually have several options. And this is the part of the transaction that you're really hoping that your real estate agent is a good negotiator, because this is when we have to go back to negotiating. So there's about 5 different things that you can do at this point. The first thing that you can do is you can give the appraisal to the seller and say, hey, it appraised lower than what we asked. Are you willing to come down? So let's just say for our example that the appraisal came in $10,000 less and it appraised at $290,000. So we can ask the seller to come down and sell the home for $290,000. Depending on how urgent the seller is, that might be something that they're willing to do. If they're okay with that, then we write an addendum with a new purchase price and we move on. The second option is you as a buyer would come out of pocket with extra cash up to the purchase price. Since your lender's only going to lend on a home that's $290,000, but you offered $300,000, you promised to pay $300,000 on this house. So essentially, you would come up with an extra $10,000 cash out of pocket to make up the difference. And depending on how desperate you are as a buyer, that might be an option for you. The third option is the most common, where we're going to negotiate that difference. So we can say, hey, Mr. or Miss Seller, will you be willing to come down $5,000 if I'm willing to put an additional $5,000 cash, and we'll meet in the middle? We'll make a purchase price of $295,000. So that's something that's reasonable. And of course, in both of these two scenarios here, we have to assume that the buyer has the cash to be able to come up if possible. Lately, I've been doing with my buyer clients something called an appraisal shortfall. It's a clause that we write into the contract when we make an offer that basically says if the home doesn't appraise, we promise to pay X number of dollars. So we promise if the home doesn't appraise, we're willing to come up an extra $3,000 cash. Because at that point, then the buyer knows that that is a possibility and they're already making plans for it. It's not like a big shock. Like, it didn't appraise and no, we got to come up with a bunch of cash. So with that appraisal shortfall, my buyers have been very lucky that they knew what they were getting into going in. We've had some short appraisals. And because we had that appraisal shortfall already in place in the contract, the sellers expected that. And we didn't have any huge back and forth negotiations. It was like, okay, well, this is what it's worth. This is what we're willing to come up, and everybody seems to be happy walking away. Also in those negotiations, you're looking at other things like, did the seller give any sort of concessions in the offer? Like, is the seller paying the buyer's closing costs? Or is the seller making a lot of repairs, like replacing the roof or water heater or something like that, that might be a bigger ticket item? And can we renegotiate that? Well, I'm willing to come down in the purchase price, but if we do that, I'm not paying closing costs. Or if we do that, I'm not paying for the roof. So there is some wiggle room there. It just, that's the negotiation game, right? It's fun. Another thing you're looking into in these negotiations is what kind of loan did you use for the appraisal. So if you're using a government loan like a VA loan or an FHA loan, and it appraises for a certain price, so let's say $290, and the seller decides that they're not coming down, and the buyer decides not to buy the house, that government appraisal is stuck on that home for 6 months if another buyer comes in with a government loan. So if an FHA buyer walks away from the home, but that appraisal stays there for 6 months, if a new buyer comes in that's FHA or VA, they're going to use that appraisal that's already there. So the seller doesn't have a lot of wiggle room at that point. As a seller, you can try to put it back on the market and hope you get a conventional buyer or a cash buyer for the purchase price that you really wanted. So it's kind of like, is it worth it to go through all that for $10,000? It's, that's where we're negotiating, right? Okay, so negotiation maybe didn't work, or the appraisal came in like ridiculous low, like nobody saw it coming low, and you could also appeal the appraisal. So the listing agent and the buyer agent can get together and run comparable property reports and see if we can find properties that maybe the appraiser may have missed that would bring more value to the home that's for sale. In most cases, the listing agent does have a list of these comparable properties they usually used when they list the home and referred a price to the seller. So hopefully those are available. And so when an appraisal is way off and it's surprising, those comparables usually are really good to provide for an appeal. For an appraiser to appeal an appraisal, though, it's rare. It's very rare. I want to say in the last few years we only had 2 appraisals that were really, really low that we appealed, and only one of them did the appraiser come back and say, my bad, you know what, you're right, and actually change the price. It almost never happens. Like when that appraiser came through and said, yeah, let's change the price, me and my lender and the other agent were all like, what? So that was a happy story for everyone at the end. But man, it's really hard to appeal. You really have to know what you're doing, finding those comparables and trying to fight for that price that you have on the purchase contract. So if negotiation didn't work, if the appeal didn't work, as a buyer, you have one last option, and that is to walk away from the property. So most states have these written in their contracts. I know Arizona definitely has it in there. It's an appraisal contingency. And basically it says if a home does not appraise, that the buyer can walk away from the transaction and get their earnest money back. And as a buyer, you definitely have the right to do that, but look at the big picture. Walking away from this situation means that at this point you've already had your inspection. You probably spent about $400 on an inspection. You already spent about $500 on the appraisal, and you have to go back on the market looking for another home. So even if it's not the most ideal situation, it's usually in your best interest to try to make this happen. If it can't, though, you are protected in the contract through the appraisal contingency. You can walk away. You can decide, you know what, I'm just not going to buy a house right now. And just know that that inspection money and that appraisal money that you've already paid, you don't get that back. But you do get your earnest money back. Now, I've been asked too, what if you're buying a new construction home, and how does the appraisal work for that? In most cases, if you're working with a new construction home, a new build, the builder is going to have a preferred lender, and the preferred lender a lot of people go with just because they give you incentives to use the builder's preferred lender. In some cases, it's better just because the lender knows these houses and how they're sold, but many people still choose their outside lender, and that's perfectly fine. Know that though, if you're using the preferred lender, they usually have a group of appraisers that know these homes pretty well or are familiar with new construction homes. The builder has a very vested interest on these homes appraising, so they're not going to necessarily overprice the homes on purpose, because if one house doesn't appraise in their whole new neighborhood, that's going to bring down the value of all their other homes that they have under contract. But we are also in an age where the builders are putting up the prices just because of the cost to build them and because the market is shifting so quickly. So yes, sometimes new build homes, the appraisal does come in a little low sometimes. I've only had one that came in really low that we did have to walk away from because they just could not negotiate, because they already had so many other houses under contract, and they were like, if we go ahead with your house, that's going to lower the value of all our other homes. So it was a mess. But in some cases, if you use the preferred lender, it doesn't happen as often. All right, sellers. I told you I had tips for buyers and sellers in this video. So sellers, here's some tips for you to make sure that your home that you're selling does appraise and that you are getting top dollar for your home. First, make a list of all the upgrades that you have in the home, the things that you think are above and beyond what other homes in your neighborhood have. So if you did remodel bathrooms and kitchens, stainless steel appliances, water softener, pool, anything that is going to bring value to your home compared to other homes in the area, make a list of them. Make a list of when those remodels got done and approximately how much money you put into those remodels. So this is a good list to give to your listing agent right away too when you go to list the home, because it helps your listing agent really bring value to the home, advertise those features, and when buyers ask about them, you have that list ready to go. When the appraisal gets ordered for your home, your listing agent is allowed to contact the appraiser and at least just check that the appraiser is knowledgeable of the area. For example, I had an appraiser that wasn't familiar with a 55 plus community that I had a home in, and we had to make sure that there was an appraiser that knew the area, that knew how those houses worked. All of them were on septic versus sewer, and there was a lot of miscommunication there. So your listing agent is allowed to contact the appraiser to make sure that they are a credible appraiser for the area. They are also allowed to send them the list of comparable properties that we talked about. And if they put that list that you made of all your remodels and upgrades, that will go a long way too. The appraiser is still going to do their job to the best of their ability, make sure that they've researched everything. Comparables are not meant to sway the appraiser in any way, but provides just additional data for them to use as they make their decision. So just make sure that that's a conversation that you're having with your potential listing agent. What is their strategy with appraisals, and what kind of negotiation skills do they bring to the table if an appraisal comes in low? So I hope that cleared up appraisals for you a little bit. If you have any more questions, my contact information is in the description. Definitely reach out to me. I'd love to answer any more questions, or drop a comment down below. Tell me some of your stories on appraisals that came in low and what happened with your home. Until next time, stay geeky, my friends.